Hi and welcome to another 2-minute table talker with the Hand Drink Solo Wine Club. And today we're talking about Allesverloren's Tinta Barocca 2018. Now, Allesverloren is an estate in the 𝔼𝕃𝕼𝕚 West ward of the Swartland, which is ironically all the way on the eastern side of the Swartland, i.e. furthest away from the Atlantic Ocean. Now, whenever winemakers make a big deal about a site in the Swartland, they usually are combining the kind of mysterious, rugged terrain of the Swartland with a cooling element like the Atlantic Ocean or some sort of altitude. However, when you're all the way over on the eastern side, the most inland part of the Swartland, it's kind of hard to reference the Atlantic Ocean as a meaningful cooling element. And this can be bad news for grape growers because usually in a hot climate like the Swartland, you're going to need some element of cool in order to slow down the ripening process of your grapes. Exactly why that's important in the glass, we'll have to leave for another day. But despite the name of the estate, all is not lost in a site where there are fewer cooling influences. And Allesverloren have been growing grapes for a very, very long time. In fact, they were the first estate in the Swartland. They harvested their first wine grapes in 1806. So they've had almost 200 years to figure out exactly what does or doesn't work. A little bit of trial and error over the last 2 centuries. But when it comes to living and thriving or just surviving in the Swartland, the error part of trial and error can lead to bankruptcy or death by exposure or starvation. So by and large, you want to trial but leave the error up to other folk. And maybe this is why the Swartland is so full of personalities who are deeply suspicious of anything new or fandangled. And when you look at winemaking visionaries who've made their home in the Swartland, like 𝔼𝕃𝕼𝕚𝕚𝕚 or 𝔼𝕃𝕼𝕚𝕚 or David and Nadia, they've essentially made their way through this terrain by adopting techniques that have been tested for centuries rather than those that have just pitched up in the last decade or two. 𝔼𝕃𝕼𝕚𝕚 still plows his vineyards with a horse. Now, in the case of Allesverloren, their little stroke of genius, their method to avoid the error in trial and error was to look around them and ask themselves, who on this planet is mad enough to try and grow wine grapes in a dry, dusty, windy terrain? And by Jove, if it wasn't the Portuguese in the Douro Valley that made it look easiest. They planted their ℼ𝕙𝕃𝕼𝕚 Nacional and ℼ𝕃𝕼 Franca and Tinta Barocca, and centuries later, they're still there and they're still doing it. In fact, they've made a global name for themselves. And so it was the combination of the fact that the Portuguese were still around to tell their tale and the fact that they had a similar climate that led guys like Allesverloren to plant similar grape varieties, which is why we can drink this Tinta Barocca today. Now, the vines harvested to make this particular Tinta Barocca were planted in 1958, which is before hipsters were even born, which means even hipsters who were born cool before it was cool to be cool were beaten to the punch by the guys at Allesverloren and these Tinta Barocca vines. Now, it's not like they're one big old block that's almost 65 years old, but rather the oldest vines were planted in 1958, and then vines were successively planted as other vines died off. And so, as I understand it, the youngest vines were planted in 95, 96. Now, on the farm, part of the vineyards are irrigated, but part of them are farmed according to a dry land ethos, which is really only possible because a cultivar like Tinta Barocca can survive in such harsh conditions, where rainfall can drop as low as 250 mils per annum and temperatures can rise as high as 40 degrees. And while it can be a lot of fun to talk about drought and dust and Portugal and grapes, it's a lot more fun to actually drink wine, and it's really in the glass that this guy sings the most. When you smell this, the nose has such pronounced elements of cherry and plum, but then also cedar wood and vanilla pod, and then this incredible dried flower, potpourri, wild violets type element, which really gives the wine a beautiful feminine feel, which is a splendid contrast to what you actually taste in the glass, which is lovely, bright, red cherry fruit, juicy acidity. Oh, makes you just want to keep sipping more. But then also quite firm tannins. And then as the fruit fades, right on the tail end, you've got an almost fennel type thing that emerges to keep you company towards the end. Now, if you're not a fan of tannins, all is not lost. You can toss this guy into a decanter for 45 minutes, or you can drink it next year. But honestly, I believe drinking it next year, while will be delicious, is a long time to wait, and life is too short. And if you really decide that you are a Tinta Barocca kind of guy, you'll be glad to know that this grape is popping up more and more as a single cultivar bottling. So you should have no trouble hunting down a few others. Some of the best come out of Calitzdorp, of course, but there are others being produced in Stellenbosch, in the Swartland, and even in Elgin. So let me know your thoughts on this guy. Leave a review at the bottom of the info video page on the ℂ𝕙𝕃𝔼𝕍𝔼ℕ𝕋ℍ website, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on Tinta Barocca in South Africa.